You know that feeling? You've slept what should be enough,
Mm-hmm.
but waking up is just, God, yes, like wading through mud.
Yeah.
That get up and go, that enthusiasm, it's just kind of missing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your battery's stuck on low.
Mm.
And if you're, say, over 35, you might be noticing this creeping in more. It's really common, actually.
It really is. And what's fascinating, is when people mention this to their doctors, often the standard tests, they don't really show anything obviously wrong.
Exactly. They get told, oh, everything looks normal, but they feel anything but normal.
Right. And that's where digging a bit deeper beyond those usual markers can be so, so helpful.
Precisely. And that's our plan for today. We've got some really interesting source material that one of you shared with us,
Mm.
looking specifically at chronic fatigue and, well, the whole complex world of hormonal balance.
Mm-hmm.
Think of this as, like, your shortcut to understanding some of the hidden factors that might be messing with your energy.
Yeah, our mission here is really to unpack how these three key hormones, you've got cortisol, DHEA, and pregnenolone, how they all link up with energy, your body clock, your metabolism, especially as we navigate life past 35.
Right.
And we'll also touch on things like adaptogens and lifestyle stuff that the source mentions.
So if you've been dealing with that kind of nagging low energy, that lack of spark that just wasn't there before, stick around. Let's dive into this material and see what insights we can pull out.
Okay, so the material we're digging into today kicks off with a really key observation.
Yeah.
This kind of chronic fatigue, it's showing up more and more, and not just in older folks or people with obvious illnesses.
Right.
It's often people who are relatively young, maybe in their mid-30s, previously pretty healthy, and suddenly they're hit with this.
And it feels so familiar, doesn't it? That constant wiped out feeling, the sheer effort it takes just to get moving in the morning.
Yeah.
And that feeling of just, well, not really wanting to do much.
No.
Physically or emotionally, is such a contrast to how you maybe felt a few years back.
Exactly. And the source is clear. This isn't usually just one single cause. It's often multifactorial.
Sure.
But for this discussion, we're really zooming in on the hormonal angle because the text lays out the roles of cortisol, DHEA, and pregnenolone quite clearly.
Okay, let's tackle cortisol first. It gets called the stress hormone all the time. What's its actual job?
Well, cortisol is absolutely central to our stress response, yeah. But it also has a natural daily rhythm. It peaks in the morning, helps us wake up, gets us going.
Oh, okay.
And what's interesting, initially, our bodies are pretty good at handling stress. The source mentions Dr. Silly's syndrome of adaptation.
Right.
Basically, when we're younger, we tend to bounce back pretty well.
Right. Think about your 20s or early 30s, maybe establishing a career, relationships.
Yeah.
You're juggling a lot.
Exactly. You feel like you can handle it. In that phase, the body's usually quite efficient release cortisol to cope, then bring it back down.
Okay.
The problem really starts when the stress isn't temporary, when it becomes chronic, ongoing. That's when cortisol levels can get stuck high.
And that's when the trouble starts. What are some of the downsides of having that stress switch jammed on?
Yeah, prolonged high cortisol. It can set off a whole bunch of negative effects. The source mentions things like high blood sugar hyperglycemia,
Okay.
breakdown of muscle tissue, that's catabolism. It can suppress your immune system.
Wow.
Even break down proteins like keratin and collagen, the stuff that keeps your skin, hair, even your gut lining strong. So yeah, chronic stress isn't just a feeling. It has real physical consequences.
That's quite a list. Okay, now DHEA.
Mm.
The source says it kind of counteracts cortisol. What does it do?
Right. DHEA, that stands for dehydroepiandrosterone, quite a mouthful. It's also made by the adrenal glands, same place as cortisol.
Okay.
And its main job is what we call anti-catabolic. It basically helps to slow down those breakdown processes that cortisol speeds up.
Like putting the brakes on.
Exactly. Plus, it's a precursor, like a raw ingredient, for other hormones, especially testosterone, particularly important for women's levels. So yeah, think of it as a natural buffer against stress-related wear and tear.
A counterbalance.
Makes sense. Precisely. But here's the key thing the source points out. Around age 37, 38 for women, maybe a bit later for men, DHEA levels naturally start to decline.
Oh.
So you get this imbalance. Cortisol might still be high from stress, but there's less DHEA pushing back against it. The breakdown effects start to win out.
And what might someone actually notice when DHEA drops and that imbalance happens?
Well, the source connects this DHEA decline to several common complaints. Things like maybe more hair shedding than usual,
Right.
digestive issues too, like bloating, things moving slower,
Right.
which can potentially lead to issues like bacterial overgrowth or even leaky gut. And that overall feeling of systemic inflammation, that kind of low-level simmering fire in the body, that can increase too.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. High stress equals high cortisol, then DHEA drops off.
It really does sound like a setup for feeling drained. Now, what about pregnenolone? I hear less about that one. Why is it important here?
Pregnenolone is, well, it's absolutely crucial. Think of it as the grandparent hormone almost. It's the starting material that the body uses to make lots of other steroid hormones,
Okay.
including DHEA, and then further down the chain, things like testosterone and progesterone.
Wow, so it's way upstream.
Exactly. And it also seems to have what they call neurotrophic effects, basically. It helps support the health and function of our brain cells.
So it's important for brain health too.
Definitely seems to be.
Hmm.
One of its key jobs in this whole energy and fatigue puzzle is helping to balance neurotransmitters,
Mm-hmm.
specifically glutamate, which is excitatory, like the brain's on switch,
Right?
and GABA, which is inhibitory, calming the off switch.
Yeah.
You need that balance for relaxation, for good sleep, for just keeping the nervous system settled.
Ah, okay. So low pregnenolone could disrupt that balance, make it harder to relax or sleep. That's the idea, yeah. Plus, low pregnenolone might affect progesterone production. And progesterone, especially for women, isn't just for cycles, it also contributes to those calming GABA levels.
So it's all interconnected. Low pregnenolone could mean less DHEA, maybe less progesterone, and potentially throw off that glutamate GABA balance needed for calm.
You got it. This whole interplay between cortisol, DHEA, and pregnenolone, and how their levels change, particularly after our mid-30s, it can really send ripples through the entire body.
And those ripples, the source talks about downstream effects, right? Like losing muscle mass.
Yes, exactly. That combination, high cortisol breaking things down, low DHEA not building things back up, can contribute to what's called sarcopenia, basically losing muscle mass and strength.
Okay.
And here's a really crucial link. Losing that metabolically active muscle mass can then lead to something called peripheral insulin resistance.
Wait, so having less muscle makes it harder for your body to handle sugar, even if your diet hasn't changed much.
That's a huge insight from the source, yeah. Your muscles are key players in glucose uptake. Less muscle means less efficient sugar handling.
Wow.
And this insulin resistance is a major driver of metabolic syndrome. You know, that cluster of issues like belly fat, inflammation in the fat cells themselves.
Right.
The source lists the whole package.
Yep.
High blood sugar, blood getting stickier, hypercoagulation, high triglycerides, oxidized LDL cholesterol, the bad kind, higher risk of artery hardening.
It keeps going.
Oh yeah, elevated uric acid, and even fat building up where it shouldn't, like the liver and pancreas, they call that lipotoxicity. It really is like a domino effect, starting with that hormonal imbalance.
And inflammation keeps popping up as a central theme here.
Absolutely. Chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation really develops from this interplay between the hormones and, interestingly, our fat tissue. It affects immune cells called macrophages, makes them release inflammatory signals, cytokines.
Cytokines.
The source names a few. Interleukin 1b, tumor necrosis factor alpha, C-reactive protein, even ferritin can be an inflammatory marker. Think of them as little alarm bells ringing constantly throughout your body.
And how do those alarm bells contribute to feeling fatigued and unwell?
Well, these inflammatory cytokines can directly cause muscle aches and pains and make recovery from exercise feel really slow and difficult.
Ah, that explains a lot.
And the source notes that for men, typically a bit later, maybe around 44 or 45, declining testosterone levels can add another layer to this, working alongside the low DHEA and high cortisol.
So similar hormonal shifts happening for men too, just maybe on a slightly different timeline.
Exactly. And the impact isn't just physical. This is really important. The source explains that these circulating inflammatory cytokines can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
Get into the brain.
Yeah, leading to neuroinflammation within the brain itself.
Neuroinflammation, that sounds not good. What does that do?
Well, it can cause a whole cascade of issues. Things like less efficient nerve-to-muscle communication, the source mentions acetylcholine release being affected. More oxidative stress in the brain, kind of like rusting.
Okay.
Even the potential for sugar molecules to kind of gunk up brain proteins. And worryingly, an increased risk for neurodegenerative conditions down the line, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, vascular dementia.
That is really sobering. And does it connect to mood as well, like depression?
Yes, definitely. These hormonal shifts and the resulting inflammation can seriously disrupt that delicate balance of neurotransmitters. We talked about glutamate, GABA, but also serotonin and dopamine.
Right.
And that disruption can certainly be a factor in developing depression. The source even flags that sometimes things like benzodiazepines or antidepressants might be used, but they could just be masking symptoms if the underlying hormonal piece isn't addressed.
It really drives home how connected everything is. Hormones, metabolism, inflammation, brain function, mood.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, the source also mentioned our body's ability to adapt has limits, right? Back to Dr. Selly.
Right. It circles back to that idea. There's that initial phase where we adapt pretty well the adaptation plateau, maybe in our younger adult years.
Hmm.
But the source emphasizes if that catabolic state, the breaking down, goes on for too long, it eventually just overwhelms the body's ability to compensate.
The system gets worn out.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that leads to a weaker immune system overall, immunosuppression. That chronic low-grade inflammation becomes entrenched, and you can get what's called immunosenescence, basically the immune system aging prematurely.
And how does a weaker, older immune system link back to that persistent fatigue?
The source points to specific immune cells, T helper cells or Th1 cells. These guys are really important for keeping certain viruses in check, like herpes viruses, CMV, things that many people carry latently.
Okay.
They're also crucial for responding effectively to new threats, like, say, COVID-19. If these Th1 cells aren't working optimally because the whole system is under strain, it can make it harder to clear infections or keep latent viruses dormant, contributing to that ongoing fatigue.
It's like the body's defenses are just running on fumes after being under siege for so long. Okay, but there's hope. The source does offer some strategies, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the big emphasis is on getting to the root causes, not just papering over the symptoms.
Makes sense.
It mentions adaptogens herbs like ashwagandha and rhodiola as potentially helpful for, well, helping the body adapt and find better hormonal balance naturally.
Adaptogens, right? We hear that term a lot. They help the body handle stress better.
That's the general idea, yeah. The source also gives a nod to things like the amino acid glycine and the mineral magnesium as being potentially beneficial,
Okay.
and supplements aimed at maybe calming down that excitatory glutamate activity in the brain and supporting the calming GABA system.
What about lifestyle stuff? Sleep seems huge here.
Absolutely crucial. The source talks about restoring healthy biorhythms, maybe using things like melatonin or tryptophan at night to support sleep, combined with getting bright morning sunlight exposure to set your internal clock.
Resetting the rhythm.
Exactly. And interestingly, it suggests gentle physical activity, like walking, rather than pushing really hard with intense exercise, at least initially. The idea is to help the nervous system gently adapt and recover, not add more stress.
So it's a much broader approach than just popping a pill. It's about supporting the whole system, stress response, nervous system, sleep.
Precisely. And the source suggests that these kinds of strategies can help naturally lower those chronically high cortisol levels.
And it reminds us cortisol isn't the enemy, right? It's the imbalance.
Exactly. Cortisol is essential. It only becomes problematic when it's stuck high all the time without enough of the counterbalancing factors, like DHEA.
Speaking of DHEA, does the source mention testing or supplementation?
It does. It highlights the value of checking DHEA sulfate levels specifically. That gives a better picture of its bioavailability, how much is actually usable by the body.
Oh.
And it revisits pregnenolone's importance, both for making other hormones and for that neurotransmitter balance, potentially boosting GABA. And finally, yes, it does mention the possibility of low-dose DHEA supplementation, but, and this is really stressed, only if levels are consistently shown to be low through testing and always under medical supervision.
Okay, so definitely not something to self-prescribe. Work with a professional.
Absolutely. Messing with hormones directly can have unintended side effects. It needs careful consideration and monitoring by someone qualified.
And the source is clear, too, that hormones are just one part of the picture, yeah.
Totally. It really emphasizes an integrative approach. So, yes, address the hormones, but also look at diet, maybe lower refined carbs. Think about when you eat carbs, especially around exercise. Maintain those healthy sleep rhythms. And don't forget psychological support if stress or mood are big factors. It all works together.
So you create this overall supportive environment, physically and mentally, and that helps the hormones find their natural balance again.
That's the goal. The source concludes that tackling these hormonal imbalances can be a really key part of managing chronic fatigue and all those related symptoms we've discussed. But it works best as part of a bigger plan that includes lifestyle and other necessary medical care.
Okay, so bringing this all together from our deep dive today, we've really seen how interconnected cortisol, DHEA,
Hmm.
and pregnenolone are, and how shifts in their balance, especially happening around, the mid-30s and onwards, can have these huge ripple effects.
Yeah, impacting energy, metabolism, inflammation levels, even brain health. It's quite profound.
And remember, this perspective comes directly from the source material you shared with us, offering one specific, valuable way to look at this really complex issue of chronic fatigue.
Exactly.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to think about. Maybe a final thought for you listening. Consider that balance, or maybe imbalance, between stress and recovery in your own life right now.
Hmm.
Could these hormonal dynamics we've talked about be playing a role in how you're feeling day to day? Perhaps this chat has sparked some questions you want to explore further.
Maybe by talking things over with your healthcare provider or just doing a bit more reading about these hormones or the adaptogens mentioned.
Yeah.
Because understanding these underlying mechanisms, it can feel really empowering, can it? It's often that crucial first step towards taking proactive measures for your long-term health and hopefully getting that vitality back.